I stood before the five-bedroom house I had purchased with countless night shifts and singular focus. My father held out his hand, his voice calm, claiming my sister needed my home more than I did. I did not argue. Instead, I smiled and delivered the sentence that would dismantle their entitlement. "Do not worry, Dad," I told him. "I have already taken care of it. My name is Mary Rowe. I am 34 years old, and I specialize in putting broken people back together. As a rehabilitation specialist at a private clinic system here in the suburbs of North Carolina, I spend my days teaching stroke victims how to hold a spoon again and helping car accident survivors learn to walk without screaming. It is a job that requires infinite patience, a strong stomach, and the ability to detach oneself from the pain of others. I learned that last skill long before I ever earned my degree. I learned it at the dinner table of my childhood, and tonight, at the dinner table of my adulthood, I was putting it to the test once again. The house we were sitting in was my masterpiece. It was a 5-bedroom colonial-style property sitting on a half-acre of manicured lawn, the kind of place that whispered old money, even though it was purchased with new, hard-earned cash. My cash. I had bought it 3 years ago. Signing the deed with a hand that trembled only slightly from exhaustion. Every brick, every shingle, every square foot of hardwood floor had been paid for by double shifts, skipped vacations, and a decade of living in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. It was the only thing in this world that was entirely, indisputably mine. Or so I thought. Dinner was a roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic, a recipe I had perfected over months of lonely Sunday evenings. My father, Gordon Rowe, sat at the head of the table, a position he assumed naturally in any room he entered. To his right sat Marla, my stepmother, a woman whose primary personality trait was an agreeable silence that masked a sharp instinct for self-preservation. To his left sat Bree, my 22-year-old half-sister. Bree was currently holding her phone above her plate, adjusting the angle to catch the light from the crystal chandelier. "The lighting in here is actually perfect. Mary," Bree said, not looking at me but at her screen. "It is soft but not yellow. Do you know how hard it is to find a house with this kind of natural ambience? I have been trying to recreate this vibe in my apartment for months, but the windows are just too small. It ruins the brand aesthetic." I took a sip of my wine. Bree did not have a job, not in the traditional sense. She was building a personal brand. She spent her days filming lifestyle vlogs, makeup tutorials, and day-in-the-life videos about the struggles of being a creative spirit in a capitalist world. "It is a lovely house, Mary," Marla added, her voice light and airy. "You really have done a wonderful job with the place. It feels so big for just one person. Though, do you not get lonely?" I set my glass down. "I am rarely here enough to be lonely, Marla. Between the clinic and the on-call hours, I mostly just sleep here." "That is exactly my point," my father said. Gordon put down his fork and wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. The gesture was slow, deliberate. It was the movement of a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. The air in the dining room shifted. The casual chatter about lighting and aesthetics evaporated, replaced by a tension that I recognized instantly. It was the same tension that used to fill the room right before he would tell me he could not afford my tuition, or that he needed to borrow my savings to cover a bad investment. But this time, the look in his eyes was different. It was not desperate. It was benevolent. "Mary, honey," Gordon started, leaning his elbows on the polished mahogany table. "We have been talking, Marla, Bree, and I. We have been worried about you." "Worried about me?" I asked. I was the only person at this table with a fully funded retirement account and zero credit card debt. I paid the mortgage on this house and the rent on Bree's apartment, a fact I had never mentioned to Marla because Gordon had asked me to keep it between us to preserve family dignity. "Yes, worried," Gordon continued, his voice smooth like oil. "You are working yourself into an early grave to pay for this mausoleum. 5 bedrooms, Mary, 5, you use one. The rest are just gathering dust and heating bills. It is wasteful, and you know how I feel about waste." I waited. I knew the punchline was coming, but I wanted to see how he would deliver it. "And then there is Bree," Gordon said, gesturing to my sister. Bree finally looked up from her phone. She tried to look solemn, but there was a gleam of anticipation in her eyes that she could not quite hide. "Bree's career is taking off," Gordon explained. "She is on the verge of something big. A major sponsorship deal is in the works, but she needs a proper workspace. Her current apartment is too cramped. It does not project the image of success she needs to close these deals. She needs a studio. She needs space for inventory. She needs a setting that screams luxury and stability." I looked at Bree. She offered me a small, practiced smile. "It is about the metrics. Mary, the engagement rates on my videos skyrocket when I film here. The followers love the background. It is an investment in the future." "So," Gordon said, clasping his hands together, "we have come up with a solution that benefits everyone, a family solution." I felt a coldness spread through my chest, starting at my heart and radiating out to my fingertips. I gripped the stem of my wine glass tighter. "We found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment near your clinic," Gordon said, as if he were presenting me with a gift. "It is modern, compact, and very low maintenance. The rent is reasonable. It is perfect for a single woman with your schedule. You would save hours on cleaning and yard work." "And the house?" I asked, my voice steady. "Bree will move in here," Gordon stated. It was not a question, it was a decree. "She will take over the master suite for her filming, and the other rooms will be converted into her editing bay, wardrobe storage, and guest space for when she collaborates with other influencers. It keeps the asset in the family. Mary, you move to the apartment, Bree takes the house, and the pressure is off you. We stop wasting potential. It is simple logic." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. They had discussed this. They had looked at apartments for me. They had mentally measured my curtains and furniture for Bree's use. They had not asked me if I wanted to sell. They had not asked me if I wanted a roommate. They had simply decided that my property, my sanctuary, was a resource to be reallocated to the member of the family with the most perceived need. My mind flashed back to the day I signed the closing papers. The bank officer had asked if there would be a cosigner. I had looked him in the eye and said no. I did it alone. I worked 60-hour weeks for 7 years. I ate instant noodles while Bree was going to music festivals. I drove a 10-year-old sedan while Gordon leased luxury cars he could not afford. This house was the physical manifestation of my sacrifice. And they wanted me to hand it over because Bree needed better lighting for her TikToks. "When would the move happen?" I asked. I needed to know the timeline of their delusion. "First of the month seems best," Gordon said, nodding approvingly at my lack of hysterics. "That gives us 2 weeks. We can hire movers for the heavy stuff. You won't have to lift a finger. Honey, we will handle the transition." Marla chimed in, smiling. "And don't worry about the furniture. Mary, Bree thinks your living room set fits her vibe perfectly, so you won't have to worry about fitting that large sofa into the apartment. It really works out for everyone." They were stripping me for parts. My house, my furniture, my life. They were carving it up like the roast chicken sitting in the center of the table. The audacity was so colossal, so absolute, that it circled all the way around and became almost impressive. Gordon did not see this as theft. He saw it as management. He was the CEO of Rowe Family Inc., and he was reassigning a department. The fact that he did not own the department was a detail he chose to ignore. I looked at my father. I saw the arrogance in his jawline, the same arrogance that had led him into 3 failed businesses. I looked at Marla, the silent accomplice. I looked at Bree, the parasite who believed she was a butterfly. I could have screamed. I could have thrown my wine in his face. I could have pulled out the deed and slammed it on the table. I could have listed every dollar I had given them over the years. But I knew my father, if I argued, he would gaslight me. He would call me selfish. He would say I did not care about family. He would turn it into an emotional brawl where he had 30 years of experience and I was just the ungrateful daughter. He wanted a fight because he knew how to win fights. He knew how to wear me down until I said yes, just to make the noise stop. So I denied him the fight. I picked up my knife and fork. I cut a small piece of chicken and ate it. I chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Bree shifted in her chair. Marla cleared her throat. Gordon frowned, waiting for the gratitude, or at least the compliance he felt he was owed. I dabbed my mouth with the napkin and looked directly at my father. "I understand exactly what you're asking for," I said. That was it. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I did not say I would move. I simply acknowledged the request. Gordon exhaled, a long sigh of relief. He smiled, that charming, winning smile that he used on investors before the money disappeared. "Good girl," he said. "I knew you would see reason. It is the only choice that makes sense." He raised his glass, to Bree's new chapter, and to Mary's. Simplification. "To family," Marla echoed. Bree clinked her glass against her father's, her eyes already scanning the room, mentally repainting my walls. I raised my glass, but I did not drink. As they celebrated the acquisition of my home, a cold, hard resolve settled in my gut. They thought this dinner was a negotiation. They thought they had won. They had no idea that by demanding the one thing I had built for myself, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Gordon thought he was managing assets. He did not realize he was liquidating his relationship with his daughter. This was not a request. It was an eviction notice. And as I watched them toast to my dispossession, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were never going to get this house, but they were going to lose everything trying. "I will make the necessary arrangements," I said softly. Gordon beamed. "That is my girl." He heard submission. He should have heard the click of a trap snapping shut. The silence that followed their departure was heavy, but it was mine. I locked the front door, engaging the deadbolt with a solid metallic thud that echoed through the foyer. I walked from room to room, turning off the lights they had left blazing. In the living room, I straightened a throw pillow Bree had tossed onto the floor to get a better camera angle. In the kitchen, I wiped a ring of red wine Marla had left on my quartz countertop. As I cleaned, the adrenaline from the dinner began to fade, replaced by a cold, aching clarity. I had not agreed to leave. I had agreed to make arrangements. There is a difference. But as I stood in the center of the dark house, the ghost of my childhood rose up to explain exactly how we had arrived at this moment. My father did not become a monster overnight. He was created, brick by brick, and I was the one who had carried the mortar. Since I was a little girl, the narrative in the Rowe household was split into two distinct genres. Bree's life was a tragedy that required constant intervention. My life was a documentary about self-sufficiency. If Bree scraped her knee, it was a medical emergency requiring ice cream and 3 days of sympathy. If I broke my arm, I was expected to hold the ice pack myself while my father finished his phone call. "You are the strong one, Mary." That was the label they slapped on my forehead before I could even read. It sounded like a compliment, but I learned quickly that it was actually a disclaimer. It meant I did not have needs. It meant my problems were not real problems because I was capable of solving them. It meant that my resources were community property, but my struggles were private. I remember when I was 16, working at a diner after school to save for a car. Gordon, he was always Gordon to the world, the charismatic businessman who bought rounds of drinks for strangers, came to me in the parking lot after my shift. He looked haggard. He told me he was short on the mortgage. He said it was just a temporary cash flow issue, a bank error, a misunderstanding. He asked for my tips. I gave them to him. I gave him the jar of crumpled $1 bills and quarters I had been hoarding for 6 months. He kissed my forehead and called me his savior. He bought Bree a new dress the next day because she was feeling down about not making the cheerleading squad. When I asked him about it, he told me that Bree needed a pick-me-up, whereas I possessed inner resilience. That was the pattern. I provided the foundation, and he built statues of himself on top of it. Over the last 10 years, this dynamic had evolved from crumpled dollar bills to wire transfers. I sat down at my kitchen island and opened my laptop. I did not need to look at the spreadsheets to know the numbers. They were burned into my retinas. 3 years ago, Gordon decided to invest in a friend's craft brewery. He pitched it as the retirement plan that would finally let him rest. He used his credit cards to fund the initial buy-in. When the brewery went under 6 months later, the debt collectors started calling. They called his house, and then they called mine. I paid off $18,000 in high-interest credit card debt. I did it quietly. I did it without Marla knowing. Gordon cried in my living room, the same living room he now wanted to turn into Bree's editing suite. He told me he was humiliated. He told me he just wanted to leave something behind for his girls. He played the tragic hero so well that I wrote the check just to stop the performance. 2 years ago, it was a tax lien. $7,000. I paid it. Last year, it was a legal issue involving a fender bender he caused while driving with expired insurance. $4,000. I paid it. Why? Because I believed the lie. I believed that if I fixed the problem, I was buying peace. I thought that by saving him from the consequences of his own recklessness, I was earning his respect. I thought I was banking goodwill, building up a reserve of gratitude that I could draw upon if I ever needed help. I was wrong. I was not banking goodwill. I was training him. I had taught Gordon Rowe that my boundaries were made of smoke. I had taught him that my money was actually his money, just temporarily held in a different account. I had taught him that no matter how big the mess, Mary would come with a mop and a bucket and clean it up without complaining. I had been so busy being the good daughter, the reliable daughter, the successful daughter, that I had made myself invisible. They did not see a person with feelings and rights. They saw a safety net, and nobody thanks a safety net for catching them. They just expect it to be there. That was why the demand for the house had come so easily to his lips. In his mind, he was not taking my house. He was just rearranging the family assets. Since I had never claimed ownership of my own life before, why would I start now? Bree was the other side of this coin. Bree, who had never finished a college semester because it was too stressful. Bree, who quit 3 jobs in a month because the managers had negative energy. Bree, who needed a 5-bedroom house to film videos because she had never been told that you have to earn the space you occupy. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The rain had started to fall, blurring the streetlights. For decades, I had viewed my silence as a virtue. I thought I was keeping the family together. I thought I was being the bigger person. But looking at my reflection in the dark glass, I realized the truth. My silence was not a virtue. It was a permission slip. I had permitted them to view me as a resource rather than a relative. I had permitted Gordon to play the big man about town while I secretly paid for the shoes he walked in. But this time was different. Money is renewable. I can work more shifts. I can earn more dollars. But this house was not just lumber and drywall. This house was the physical proof that I existed outside of them. It was the one place where I was not Gordon's daughter or Bree's sister. Here, I was just Mary. If I gave them this house, I would not just be losing property. I would be losing the only version of myself that was free. I turned away from the window. The sadness that usually accompanied these realizations was absent. In its place was a cold, hard determination. Gordon expected me to react emotionally. He expected me to cry, or to yell, or to beg him to let me stay. He was prepared for an emotional argument because he knew how to win those. He would talk about family, about duty, about how much he had sacrificed to raise me, conveniently forgetting who had actually paid for the groceries during the lean years. If I fought him with feelings, I would lose. So I would not use feelings. I would use facts. I sat back down at the computer. I opened a new folder and named it simply, The Receipts. I began to download bank statements going back 10 years. I pulled up images of canceled checks. I found the emails where he pleaded for loans, promising to pay me back next month, next week, when the big deal closed. I found the text messages where Bree asked for rent money because she had spent her paycheck on a designer handbag that was crucial for her brand image. I worked through the night. I did not sleep. The glow of the monitor was the only light in the room. I was building a dossier. I was constructing a mirror so high and so wide that when I finally held it up, they would have no choice but to look at themselves. Gordon Rowe wanted to talk about who deserved this house. He wanted to talk about fairness. He wanted to talk about investments. Fine, we would talk about investments. I would show him exactly who had invested what. I printed document after document, the printer's rhythmic whirring sounding like a heartbeat in the quiet house. By the time the sun came up, I had a stack of paper an inch thick. I placed it in a manila envelope and sealed it. I was done being the silent partner in the business of Gordon's ego. I was done being the strong one so Bree could be the weak one. He wanted my house. He could try to take it, but he was about to learn that the daughter who built the castle knew exactly where the dungeons were. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the woman in the mirror. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. I am not moving, I whispered to the reflection. I walked into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. Then, I picked up my phone and sent a text to the family group chat. I have looked into the logistics. I wrote, "Come over on Sunday. We need to sign some papers before we proceed." It was the truth, just not the papers they were expecting. I sent the message at exactly 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. It was a strategic time. I knew Gordon would be on his second cup of coffee, feeling important while scrolling through news feeds he did not understand. And Bree would be just waking up, checking her engagement metrics. I wrote, "Regarding the house transition, I am willing to discuss the logistics. You may come over this afternoon between 4 and 5 to take measurements for Bree's studio. Please be punctual as I have a shift this evening." I did not use the word yes. I did not use the word agree. I used the phrase discuss the logistics. It was a non-binding statement that sounded like surrender to ears that were desperate to hear it. The response was immediate. Gordon sent a thumbs-up emoji, followed by a text that read, "Knew you would step up. Proud of you." Bree sent a string of party poppers and a message that said, "OMG, finally! I have so many ideas for the lighting." I set my phone down on the counter. They saw a white flag. I saw bait. I spent the rest of the morning preparing the stage. I did not clean in the traditional sense. Instead, I ensured that every single security camera in the house was operational. I checked the angles on the living room camera, which was discreetly hidden in a smoke detector. I verified the audio feed on the kitchen camera, which sat innocuously on top of the refrigerator disguised as a smart home hub. I cleared the memory cards to ensure I had maximum recording time. If they were going to plan the demolition of my life, I wanted it recorded in high definition. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Gordon's leased luxury sedan, a vehicle that cost more per month than my first apartment. They did not knock. The door handle turned, and when it did not open, Gordon rang the doorbell with an impatient, rapid-fire rhythm. I opened the door. Gordon swept past me without a greeting, carrying a clipboard. He looked like a general surveying a conquered city. Bree followed, holding her phone on a gimbal, already recording for her followers. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," Bree chirped at her screen, walking right over the threshold I had paid for. "So, big news. We are finally at the new headquarters. I'm going to give you a tour of the space before the renovation begins." "Renovation?" I asked, closing the door behind them. Gordon waved his hand dismissively. "Just minor touches. Mary, Bree needs to make it her own. You know how it is. Branding." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. I did not offer them water. I did not offer them a seat. I was an observer in my own home. Bree walked into the living room. This was a room I had designed with intention. The floors were Brazilian cherry. The walls a soft, warm beige that caught the sunset perfectly. I loved this room. "This is way too dark," Bree announced, panning her camera around. "We need to paint everything white, high-gloss white. And these floors? They are too red. We should probably cover them with that gray vinyl planking. It looks more modern." My stomach tightened. She wanted to cover $10,000 worth of hardwood with cheap plastic. "And that wall," Bree continued, pointing to the structural wall separating the living room from the dining area. "That needs to go. We need an open concept flow. If we knock that down, I can set up the ring lights in the center and get a 360 view." "You cannot knock that wall down," I said, my voice flat. "It is load-bearing. The roof will collapse." Gordon looked up from his clipboard, where he was scribbling furiously. "We can put in a beam." "Mary, do not be so negative. Everything is figure-outable if you have the right contractor. I know a guy. He owes me a favor." "He owes you a favor, or you owe him money." I thought, but I did not say it. I let the audio recorder on the kitchen counter capture his statement. Gordon walked over to the fireplace. He ran his hand along the mantelpiece, claiming it. "The master suite is the priority. Though," Gordon said, turning to me, "Bree needs that for the main studio. You should probably start packing that room first. When can you have it cleared out? By Friday?" I stared at him. The sheer efficiency of his greed was breathtaking. He had skipped past the gratitude, skipped past the logistics of my relocation, and went straight to the eviction timeline. "I am still looking at apartments," I lied. "It takes time to process the application." Gordon frowned. "Well, speed it up. Time is money. Mary, Bree has sponsors waiting. We cannot have your procrastination holding up the launch." He began pacing the room, tapping his pen against his teeth. He looked agitated, not just excited. There was a nervous energy to him that did not quite match the situation. He kept checking his watch. He kept glancing at the front window. Bree was now in the hallway, talking about ripping out the vintage sconces I had hunted down at an estate sale. "I need to take a call," Gordon muttered. He walked toward the kitchen, away from Bree's chatter. I stayed where I was, but I pulled out my phone and opened the app that controlled my security system. I tapped on the kitchen camera feed. I put one earbud in my ear, hidden by my hair. I watched on the small screen as my father stood by my kitchen island. He dialed a number. He looked around to make sure he was alone. He spoke low, but the microphone picked it up clearly. "Yeah, it is Gordon," he said. "Look, the appraisal is going to happen. I am securing access. The daughter is moving out. Yes, the equity is there. It is substantial. I told you, I can cover the bridge loan once the refinancing goes through. Just hold the paperwork until Monday." I froze. Refinancing? My house was paid for. There was no mortgage. There was nothing to refinance. And even if there were, he was not the owner. He could not refinance a property he did not own, unless he was presenting himself as the owner. I took the earbud out and walked into the kitchen. Gordon jumped slightly when he saw me. He hung up the phone immediately, shoving it into his pocket. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just business," he said, his smile tight. "Trying to clear my schedule so I can help you with the move. You know me, always juggling." "Right," I said, "always juggling." I looked at the clock. It was 4:55. "You need to wrap up," I said. "I have to leave for work in 5 minutes." Bree groaned from the hallway. "But I have not measured the closet yet." "Come back another time," I said, ushering them toward the door. "I am locking up." Gordon looked annoyed, but he didn't argue. He felt he had made progress. He had seen the inside. He had confirmed I was compliant. "I will send over the mover's details," Gordon said as he stepped onto the porch. "Do not worry about the cost. I will take care of it." "I am sure you will," I said. I watched them drive away. The moment their taillights disappeared around the corner, the mask fell off. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. Refinancing. He was not just trying to kick me out. He was trying to cash out. I went to my home office and sat down. I did not go to work. I had called in sick hours ago. I needed to verify what I had just heard. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the direct line to Mr. Henderson, the branch manager at the local bank where I held my primary accounts. He had helped me with the closing on this house 3 years ago. "Mary," Mr. Henderson answered after 2 rings. "Good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "I hope so." I said, "I have a strange question. David, has there been any activity or inquiry regarding my property title in the last week?" There was a pause. I heard the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. "Let me check the system," he said. "Give me a moment." The silence stretched. I watched the second hand on my wall clock tick, tick, tick. "That is odd," Mr. Henderson said. What is it? I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. We received a preliminary inquiry for a home equity line of credit on your address 3 days ago. He said, the application wasn't fully submitted, but a credit check was initiated. Who initiated it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The name on the inquiry is Gordon Rowe, he said. It lists him as a co-owner. I closed my eyes. He had forged documents, or he was preparing to forge them. He was going to use my house, my hard-earned sanctuary, as collateral for another one of his doomed business schemes. He was going to strip the equity out of my home to fund Bree's vanity project and his own debts. And when he inevitably defaulted, the bank would come for me. He was not just taking my bedroom, he was stealing my financial future. Is he listed on the deed? Mary? Mr. Henderson asked, his voice serious. Because our records show you as the sole owner. I opened my eyes. He is not. I said, he has absolutely no claim to this property. Okay, Mr. Henderson said, then this is fraud. Do you want me to flag it? Not yet, I said. I looked at the stack of papers on my desk, the receipts, the bank statements, and now, this. If I stopped him now, he would claim it was a mistake. He would say he clicked the wrong box. He would play the confused old man. He would get away with it. And the family would say I was overreacting. I needed him to commit. I needed him to walk into the trap so deep that he could never climb out. David, I said, can you print out that inquiry record for me? And any documentation he submitted? I can, Mr. Henderson said, but Mary, if he tries to proceed, let him try. I interrupted. If he comes back to the bank, or if he calls, do not tell him I know. Just tell him you need more verification. Stall him. Mary, what are you doing? I am protecting my investment. David, just send me the papers. I hung up the phone. The sun had gone down. The house was dark again. But this time, I did not feel small. I felt dangerous. Gordon Rowe thought he was playing chess. He thought he was moving a pawn. He did not realize that while he was eyeing the king, the queen had already cornered him. He wanted to refinance my house. He wanted to sign papers. I would give him a signing ceremony he would never forget. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the camera on the refrigerator. The little red light blinked back at me. I have you, I whispered. I picked up my phone and texted Gordon. I have thought about it. Let's meet to finalize everything. Bring Bree. I added a smiling emoji. It was time to end this. The notification arrived at 10:14 in the morning on Wednesday. I was sitting in the break room at the clinic, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, when my phone vibrated against the table. It was not a text message or a social media alert. It was a push notification from the credit monitoring service I had subscribed to years ago, a service I rarely checked because my financial life was boringly predictable. The screen read, "New hard inquiry detected." I unlocked the phone and tapped the notification. The app opened, displaying the details in stark, black and white text. A mortgage lender, not my usual bank, but a secondary lender known for high-risk loans and fast approvals, had requested a review of my credit history. But it was the detail below that made my blood run cold. Associated application, joint home equity line of credit. Primary applicant, Gordon Rowe. Co-applicant, Mary Rowe. Collateral address, 1402 Oakwood Drive. My address. I stared at the screen. I had not signed an application. I had not spoken to this lender. My father had not just inquired about the house. He had actively forged an application using my social security number, which he likely had memorized from my childhood or dug out of old tax documents he had kept. He was trying to take out $150,000 of equity against my home. The audacity was no longer just a personality trait, it was now a felony. I stood up, leaving my coffee on the table. I walked to a quiet corner of the hallway and dialed the number for the fraud department of the credit bureau. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. I felt like a surgeon stepping up to an operating table. I need to report unauthorized activity. I told the representative, I want to place an immediate freeze on my credit report, and I need to flag a specific application as fraudulent. As I went through the security questions, my mother's maiden name, the make of my first car, the street I lived on in 2010, I felt a detachment that was almost robotic. I was dismantling my father's plan not with screaming, but with administrative precision. Once the credit freeze was confirmed, I called the lender listed on the alert. I navigated through 3 automated menus until I reached a human being. "My name is Mary Rowe," I said. "You have an application for a HELOC under my name and the name Gordon Rowe. I am informing you that I did not sign this application. I am the sole owner of the property. Any signature purporting to be mine is a forgery." The silence on the other end was heavy. "We have an appointment scheduled for noon today to finalize the documents," the loan officer said, sounding confused. "Mr. Rowe indicated that you would be signing remotely or providing power of attorney." "I am not signing remotely," I said, "and I have not granted power of attorney. If you proceed with this loan, you will be facilitating mortgage fraud. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Ms. Rowe. We will flag the file immediately." I hung up. It was 10:45. They were going to the bank at noon. I went back to work. I treated 2 patients. I helped a stroke victim button his shirt. I helped a teenager with a torn ACL learn to use crutches. I went through the motions of healing others while waiting for the inevitable infection in my own family to burst. At 12:30, my phone began to ring. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Then a text message popped up. "Pick up the phone, now." I waited another 10 minutes. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to stand in that bank lobby, feeling the eyes of the staff on him, realizing that the magic carpet he had been standing on had just been yanked away. Finally, at 12:45, I walked out to my car and sat in the driver's seat. I called him back. "Mary!" Gordon screamed the moment the connection opened. His voice was so loud, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What did you do?" I kept my voice low and even. "I am at work." "Dad, what is the problem?" "You know what the problem is?" he shouted. "We are at the bank. We are sitting here with the loan officer. Do you know how humiliating this is? They just told me the application is flagged. They said there is a freeze on the credit." "Oh," I said, yes. I received an alert about potential identity theft this morning. Someone tried to take out a loan in my name without my permission. I had to shut everything down to protect myself. You know how dangerous hackers are these days." There was a sputtering sound on the other end. He was choking on his own lies. He could not admit that he was the hacker without admitting to the crime, but he could not pretend to be innocent without accepting defeat. "It was not a hacker," he hissed. "It was for the studio. For the house. I told you I was handling the financing." "You said you were handling the moving costs." I corrected him. "You never said you were borrowing $150,000 against a house you do not own." "I needed liquidity," Gordon roared. "It is a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back as soon as Bree's sponsorship money came in. You are ruining everything." "Mary," the officer is looking at me like I'm a criminal. Because that is what criminals do. "Dad," I thought, but out loud. I said nothing. I heard Bree's voice in the background. She sounded scared, a tone I rarely heard from her. "Dad, why are they asking for the deed?" Bree asked. "You said the paperwork was done. They are saying we have to leave." "Shut up, Bree," Gordon snapped at her. The mask was slipping. Gordon Rowe, the benevolent patriarch, the man who made things happen, was disintegrating. He was being exposed as a fraud in front of his golden child. "Mary, listen to me," Gordon said, his voice dropping to a desperate, menacing growl. "You need to call them right now. You need to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized me to act on your behalf. If you do not unfreeze this, the deal falls through. The renovation team is already booked. I have paid deposits." "You paid deposits with what money?" I asked. "With the credit card," he shouted. "I was going to pay it off with the loan." My stomach twisted. He had already spent the money he did not have. He had dug a hole, and now he was demanding I jump into it so he could climb out on my shoulders. "I cannot do that," Dad, I said, the bank knows it is fraud. If I call them and lie, I become an accomplice. I am not going to prison for your renovation. You are selfish, he screamed. You have always been selfish. You sit on that big house like a dragon on a pile of gold while your sister struggles. I am trying to build a legacy here. You are trying to steal my equity, I said. I am your father. That does not give you the right to forge my signature, I said. There was a silence on the line, heavy and breathing. This is not over, Gordon said. You think you are smart? You think you can embarrass me like this? I made you, and I am unmaking you, I thought. I am hanging up now, I said. I have patience to see. I ended the call. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of a soldier who has just survived an ambush. I sat in the silence of my car, watching the traffic pass by on the main road. For years, I had told myself that my father was just bad with money. I told myself he was a dreamer, a bit irresponsible, perhaps a bit narcissistic. I had framed his behavior in the soft light of familial dysfunction. But today, the lighting had changed. This was not dysfunction. This was predation. He had not just asked for the house. He had tried to extract its value before he even moved in. He viewed me not as a daughter, but as a financial host organism. He was willing to destroy my credit, risk my legal standing, and jeopardize my career just to keep his own delusions of grandeur afloat. The family dinner, the logistics, the arrangements, it was all a distraction. While I was worried about moving furniture, he was busy drafting loan documents. I looked at the phone in my lap. The screen was dark. I realized then that the man who had raised me was gone, or perhaps he had never existed. The man who had just screamed at me was a stranger who happened to know my social security number. And you do not negotiate with strangers who try to rob you. You prosecute them. I started the car. I was not going back to work. I had one more stop to make. I drove to the bank, my bank, where Mr. Henderson worked. I needed to secure the physical deed. I needed to make sure that there were no other loopholes he could exploit. As I drove, I thought about Bree. She had seen him panic. She had seen him get rejected. For the first time in her life, the illusion of Daddy the hero had cracked. She had heard the loan officer say the words, "not the owner." She had heard him scream at me. The seed of doubt had been planted. But I knew my father. He would spin this. He would tell her I was jealous. He would tell her I was sabotaging her because I was bitter about her success. He would paint himself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter and a rigid banking system. He would try to rally the troops for a counterattack. Let him try. I had the alert. I had the phone records. I had the rejected application. This was no longer a family dispute about who got the big bedroom. This was a documented attempt at financial theft. And I was just getting started with the evidence. The war did not begin with a lawsuit. It began with a notification on my phone at 7 p.m, just as I was heating up leftover soup. The silence from the bank incident had lasted exactly 6 hours. Now, the noise was returning, but it was coming from a different frequency. It started with Bree. I opened the social media app and saw that I had been tagged in a story. It was a video, filmed in the front seat of my father's car. The lighting was moody, likely filtered to emphasize the unshed tears glistening in Bree's eyes. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking out the window. Wistful and tragic. The caption was overlaid in a fragile, white font. Sometimes the people you look up to the most are the ones who gatekeep your happiness. Heartbroken. Toxic. Family moving on betrayal. She did not name me. She did not have to. I scrolled to the comments. They were already pouring in. Stay strong. Queen, jealousy is a disease. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life. Cut them off. Success makes people ugly. I put the phone down. It was a masterclass in modern manipulation. Bree had weaponized her audience of strangers, painting a picture of a victimized creative spirit crushed by an unseen oppressor. To the world, she was the underdog. To me, she was a squatter who had just been denied entry. But Bree was just the Air Force. Marla was the ground troops. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. Linda was a kind woman, but she possessed a gullibility that bordered on pathological. "Mary," Linda said, her voice trembling with concern, "I just got off the phone with Marla. Is everything okay?" I sat down at the kitchen island. "What did Marla say?" "Linda?" "She said you are having some sort of mental break," Linda whispered. "She said Gordon tried to help you manage your assets because you were overwhelmed. And well, she said you screamed at him in a bank lobby and accused him of stealing. She said you threw them out of the house. Mary, honey, are you off your medication?" I closed my eyes. "I do not take medication." "Linda, Marla said you were hysterical. She said you promised Bree the house months ago, and now you are reneging because of, well, she implied it was a jealousy thing over Bree's career." I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest, but I swallowed it. Marla had taken the truth, inverted it, and sold it to the family before I even had time to drive home. She had framed my defense of my property as a symptom of instability. If I was crazy, then Gordon's attempt to take control of my finances wasn't theft. It was guardianship. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice level, "I am going to tell you this once. Gordon tried to take out a $150,000 loan against my house without my knowledge. He forged my name on an application. That is why there was a scene at the bank." There was a long silence on the other end. "Oh," Linda said, that does not sound like Gordon." "No," I said, "it sounds exactly like Gordon. It just does not sound like the Gordon he pretends to be at Thanksgiving." I hung up. I knew Linda would call Marla back. I knew the story would mutate again, but I was not interested in winning the gossip cycle. I was interested in survival. Then came the text from the man himself. At 8:30, Gordon sent a message. It was not an apology, it was a sermon. "I remember when you were 6 and you wanted that bicycle. I worked double shifts for 2 weeks to get it for you. I have always put you first. I have always sacrificed my comfort for your happiness. It breaks my heart that you would humiliate me over a clerical error. We are family. Money is just paper. Blood is forever. Call me when you are ready to apologize." I stared at the screen. A clerical error. That was what he called felony fraud. He was trying to leverage the past to mortgage my future. He was counting on the fact that I was the good daughter, the one who remembered the bicycle and forgot the years of negligence. He thought that if he squeezed the guilt hard enough, I would fold. I did not reply. I did not block him. I needed his messages. Every text, every threat, every manipulation was evidence. I put the phone in a drawer. I was done with the emotional front. It was time to open the financial front. I went to my office and unlocked the file cabinet. I pulled out the box of old tax returns and bank statements I had been keeping for 7 years. I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop. I named the file, the ledger. I started with the big numbers. The $18,000 for his credit card debt in 2021, the $7,000 for the tax lien in 2022. Then I went deeper. I logged into my online banking and searched for transfers. August 12th, 2023, $500, memo, car repair. November 4th, 2023, $300, memo, Breeze Dental Work, December 1st, 2023, $1,000, memo, Christmas help. The list grew. It scrolled down the screen, row after row of red numbers. I had been subsidizing their lifestyle in increments of $200, $500, $1,000 for a decade. I added a column for interest, calculating what that money would be worth if I had invested it in an index fund instead of the Gordon Row charity for mismanaged men. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet made me nauseous. It was enough to buy a small condo. But as I was going through the statements from the last 3 months, something caught my eye. It was a transaction on my secondary credit card, a card I rarely used. It was for a ride-sharing service, $12.50. I frowned. I had not used a rideshare in 6 months. I drove everywhere. I scanned down. 2 days later, a charge for a food delivery service, $45. The delivery address was not listed on the statement, but the restaurant was a sushi place near my father's rental house. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I opened the statement for the previous month. Online retailer, $200. Streaming service subscription, $15. Gas station, $60. They were small charges, unobtrusive, the kind of things that get lost in the noise of a monthly statement if you are not looking for them. Gordon or Bree or Marla had my card number. I remembered a dinner 2 months ago. I had left my purse in the living room while I went to the bathroom. It would have taken 10 seconds to snap a photo of the front and back of my card. They were testing the waters. They were using my credit line to buy sushi and gas. Seeing if I would notice, and because I hadn't. Because I had been too busy working to pay for the house they wanted to steal. They had grown bolder. This was why Gordon felt comfortable applying for the home equity loan. He had already been stealing from me for months, and I hadn't made a sound. He thought I was asleep at the wheel. I was not asleep anymore. I picked up the phone and called the credit card company's 24-hour fraud line. I need to report unrecognized transactions. I told the agent, and I need to close this account immediately. As I went through the charges, canceling the card, a cold realization settled over me. This was not just about money. This was about entitlement. They felt so entitled to my labor that they did not even consider this stealing. In their minds, my wallet was the family petty cash drawer. Once the credit card was canceled, I did not stop. I logged into the 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a total freeze on my Social Security number. No one, not even me, could open a new line of credit, take out a loan, or buy a car in my name without a unique PIN that only I possessed. I changed the passwords to my bank accounts. I changed the passwords to my email. I changed the passcode on my phone. I was locking the gates. At 11:00 in the evening, I sat back in my chair. The house was silent. The spreadsheet was open on my screen, a glowing indictment of my own blindness. I looked at the total sum again, $142,000 over 10 years. That was the clerical error. That was the price of being the strong one. My phone buzzed in the drawer. I took it out. It was an alert from the bank. Transaction declined. Netflix subscription. Amount, $19.99. Then another. Transaction declined. Uber Eats. Amount, $52. They were trying to order late-night food, and the card had just stopped working. I smiled, but there was no joy in it. It was the grim smile of a chess player who has just taken the opponent's knight. They would know, right about now, as the payment failed, as the screen turned red, they would know that the tap had been turned off. Gordon would not be ashamed. He would be furious. He would see this not as justice, but as an act of aggression. He would tell Marla that I was starving them. He would tell Bree that I was petty. The smear campaign on social media was just the opening act. The gossip with the ants was just the warm-up. Now that I had cut off the supply line, the real siege would begin. I saved the spreadsheet. I printed a copy and added it to the manila envelope, placing it right next to the rejected loan application. I turned off the computer and walked to the window. The street was empty. "You can post all the videos you want. Bree," I whispered to the darkness. "You can tell all the stories you want. Dad, but you are going to have to pay for your own sushi tonight." I went to bed. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I knew the storm was coming, but for the first time, I knew exactly where I stood, and I knew exactly what I was worth. The rain began at dusk, a relentless gray sheet of water that turned the suburban streets of North Carolina into slick, black mirrors. It was Friday night, the kind of night where sensible people were indoors with warm tea and bad movies. I was indoors, but I was not watching a movie. I was watching the driveway. I knew they were coming. The failed credit card transactions on Thursday had been the warning shot. The silence on Friday morning was the calm before the assault. Gordon Rowe did not retreat when his supply lines were cut. He charged. At 9:30 in the evening, headlights swept across my living room window. I stood up from the armchair where I had been waiting. I did not turn on the porch light. I wanted them to stand in the dark for a moment. I wanted them to feel the cold reality of the boundary they were about to cross. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Gordon was standing there, water dripping from the brim of his hat. Beside him was Bree, huddled under a large umbrella, clutching her phone with one hand and a portable ring light with the other. But it was what lay behind them that made my pulse steady into a cold, hard rhythm. Suitcases, 3 large, hard-shell suitcases and 2 duffel bags were piled on my wet porch. They had not come to talk. They had come to occupy. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound was loud in the quiet foyer. I opened the door, but I did not step back. I filled the frame, my hand resting on the door jamb, blocking the entrance. Gordon looked up. His face was flushed, a mix of exertion and righteous indignation. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. "Move aside. Mary," he said, "we are getting wet." I looked at the suitcases. Then I looked at him. "You are not coming in," I said. Gordon let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Do not be ridiculous. I am your father. This is your sister. We have luggage. We have given up the lease on the other place. We are moving in tonight. It is done." He reached for the handle of the nearest suitcase. "Bree, start recording," Gordon commanded. Bree raised the phone. The ring light flared to life, casting a harsh, artificial halo around my face. I squinted against the glare. "Hey guys," Bree said, her voice trembling with a practiced vulnerability. "So, we are standing here in the pouring rain. My dad and we have nowhere to go because my sister, who promised us this house, is literally locking us out. Look at this. This is what family betrayal looks like." She panned the camera to the wet suitcases, then back to my face. "Say hi to the internet." "Mary," Bree sneered, "tell them why you are letting your dad catch pneumonia." I looked directly into the lens. I did not blink. "Get that camera out of my face, Bree," I said calmly, "or I will take it as evidence of harassment." Gordon stepped forward, using his physical bulk to try and intimidate me. He pulled a folded document from inside his wet jacket. It was damp at the edges. "Enough of this," Gordon barked. "You want to play by the rules? Fine, here are the rules." He thrust the paper toward me. "It is a family asset management agreement," he declared. I had it drawn up. It states that as the head of the household, I have the right to allocate family resources for the benefit of all members. It designates this property as a shared family trust. It is legal. Mary, it supersedes whatever selfish ideas you have in your head. Now move. I did not take the paper. I just looked at it. The text was dense, likely copied and pasted from some sovereign citizen website or a shady legal forum. I looked Gordon in the eye. "Who signed it?" I asked. Gordon blinked. The rain was dripping off his nose. "What? Who signed that document?" "Dad," I repeated. "Did I sign it?" Gordon puffed up his chest. "I signed it. On behalf of the family entity, it is binding." "I see," I said, "just like the loan application?" The air on the porch seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bree's hand wavered. The camera angle dipped slightly. Gordon's face went from red to a pale, waxy gray. He licked his lips. That was a misunderstanding," he stammered. "I told you. I was going to explain." "There is nothing to explain," I said. I reached behind me, to the small table in the foyer where I had placed the manila envelope. I had been keeping it ready for this exact moment. I stepped out onto the porch, forcing Gordon to take a step back into the rain. I held the envelope up. It was thick, heavy with the weight of 10 years of exploitation. "Bree," I said, turning to my sister, "keep the camera rolling. You are going to want to record this part. It will get you a lot of views." Bree looked confused. She looked from me to the envelope, then to our father. "What is that?" Bree asked. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is the real history of this family." I pulled out the first sheet of paper. It was the printout of the fraudulent loan inquiry from the credit bureau, magnified so the text was legible even in the dim light. "This is a record of a felony," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Attempted mortgage fraud, identity theft, $150,000. That carries a prison sentence of up to 30 years. Dad. Gordon made a grab for the paper. I pulled it back sharply. Do not touch me, I warned. I pulled out the next stack. These are the bank statements. I continued. $142,000. That is how much I have given you over the last decade. Car repairs, rent, legal fees, sushi. I looked at Bree. And your brand? I said. The camera you are holding? I paid for it. The laptop you edit on? I paid for it. The car you drove here? I paid the insurance last month. Bree lowered the phone. The ring light cast a grotesque shadow on her face. She looked at Gordon. Dad? She whispered. You said you paid for the camera. You said you had an investment fund. Gordon was shaking now, and it was not from the cold. She is lying, he shouted, but his voice cracked. She is manipulating the numbers. It is a spreadsheet. Anyone can make a spreadsheet. I pulled out the final piece of evidence. It was the log of the credit card transactions I had disputed and closed the night before. I canceled the credit card last night. I said, the one you two have been using to order takeout and buy gas. That is why your Uber Eats order was declined. Bree, that is why your Netflix cut out. It is not a glitch. It is me, finally closing the bank of Mary. Bree looked at her phone, then at me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The narrative she had built, the rich, selfish sister and the struggling, mobile artist, was collapsing. She wasn't the victim. She was the parasite. Gordon tried one last, desperate maneuver. He threw the damp agreement on the ground. You ungrateful child, he screamed. After everything I did for you, I put a roof over your head. I put a roof over my own head, I shouted back, my voice finally rising, echoing off the wet pavement. I bought this roof. I bought the walls. I bought the floor you are standing on, and you tried to steal it from underneath me. I took a step forward. Gordon flinched. Listen to me closely, I said, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper. You are going to take your suitcases. You are going to get back in that car, and you are going to leave. And if you do not? I asked, answering the question before he could ask it. I held up the envelope again. I will hand this entire file to the district attorney tomorrow morning. I will press charges for the identity theft. I will press charges for the credit card fraud. I will sue you for every dime I can prove you misappropriated. I will make sure that the only room you move into is a jail cell. Gordon stood there, water running down his face, mixing with the sweat of his panic. He looked at the envelope. He knew I was not bluffing. He had spent his life gambling on my compliance, and he had finally rolled snake eyes. Bree was already backing away. She had turned off the ring light. The darkness returned, heavy and suffocating. Dad, let's go, Bree said, her voice thin and scared. Dad, please, she has the papers. Gordon looked at me with pure hatred. It was the look of a man who realizes he has lost his power and has nothing to replace it with. You are dead to me, he spat. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. Good, I said. Ghosts do not need 5 bedrooms. I stepped back inside and slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. I watched through the peephole as they dragged their suitcases back through the rain. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They loaded the heavy bags into the trunk, soaking their clothes, their dignity dissolving in the downpour. Bree did not film the retreat. There was no angle that could make this look good. I watched until the taillights faded into the night. I turned around and leaned against the door. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. The envelope was still in my hand. They were gone, but I knew this wasn't the end. Gordon Rowe was a cornered animal, and cornered animals do not just run away, they bite. He would try to find a legal loophole. He would try to destroy my reputation since he could not take my property. Let him try. I looked at the envelope. I had enough ammunition to fight a war, and for the first time in my life, I was willing to pull the trigger. The family intervention was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at Aunt Linda's house. They did not call it an intervention, of course. In the group text, which I had not yet left, Marla referred to it as a healing circle. She claimed that after the disturbing events of Friday night, the rain, the suitcases, the shouting, we needed to come together in a neutral space to address my emotional volatility. I knew exactly what it was. It was an ambush. They expected me to walk into Linda's living room, faced with the disappointed gazes of my extended relatives, and crumble under the weight of collective shame. They expected me to apologize for locking my father out in the rain. They expected me to hand over the keys to the house as a penance for my bad behavior. I arrived at 2:00 in the afternoon. I was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and trousers, the same outfit I wore when I negotiated salary contracts at the clinic. I carried nothing but the thick manila envelope and a sleek, portable tablet. When I entered the living room, the tableau was set. Gordon sat in the high-backed armchair, looking weary and aggrieved, playing the part of the martyr perfectly. Marla sat beside him, holding his hand, her face a mask of tragic concern. Bree was perched on the ottoman, her phone propped up on a stack of magazines, recording a time-lapse of the reconciliation for her followers. Aunt Linda and two of my cousins stood by the kitchen, looking uncomfortable. "Mary," Aunt Linda said, stepping forward with her arms open, "we are so glad you came. We just want to help." I sidestepped her hug gently but firmly. "I am not here for a hug. Linda," I said, "I am here to clarify the accounting." I walked to the center of the room. I did not sit down. I placed the envelope on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the wood was heavy, a dull thud that silenced the room. Gordon cleared his throat. "Mary, we do not need to make this transactional. This is about family. It is about how you hurt us." I ignored him. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of spreadsheets, stapled together by year. "For the last 48 hours, the narrative has been that I am selfish," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "The narrative is that I have abandoned my family, that I am hoarding resources while my sister struggles." I looked at Bree. She was watching me, her eyes darting between her phone and my face. "So, I did the math," I continued. "I decided to calculate exactly what the selfish daughter has cost this family versus what she has contributed." I picked up the first sheet. "Year 2015, I read aloud. "I was 24. Gordon, you told the family you paid off my student loans as a graduation gift." Gordon shifted in his seat. "Mary, that is ancient history." "The reality," I said, raising my voice slightly, "is that you borrowed $10,000 from me 2 months after graduation to cover payroll for your failed consulting firm. You never paid it back. I paid my own loans, plus your payroll." I flipped the page. "Year 2016, the family trip to Hawaii. Marla, you told everyone that Gordon's investments were paying off." Marla stiffened. She looked at Gordon nervously. "Cost of the trip, $8,000. I recited. "Source of funds, my emergency savings account, which Gordon accessed by claiming he needed a temporary bridge for a liquidity event. He promised to pay it back in 30 days. It has been 9 years. Interest accrued at 5%, $3,500. Gordon stood up. "This is ridiculous. You cannot charge interest to your father." "Sit down," I said. It was not a request. It was a command, delivered with such icy authority that Gordon actually sank back into the chair. I turned to Marla. "Year 2018, I said. You had that minor surgery. You told me insurance didn't cover the anesthesiologist. You needed $4,000. Marla nodded quickly. "Yes, and we were so grateful." "Mary, that was a medical necessity." I looked at the bank statement attached to the spreadsheet. The check was made out to the Sapphire Spa and Wellness Center. I read, "The invoice lists a rejuvenation package, including fillers, laser treatments, and a weekend stay." The room went dead silent. Aunt Linda gasped. Gordon slowly turned his head to look at Marla. "You told me that was for the gallstones." Marla's face went pale. She stammered, pulling her hand away from his. It was for my mental health. Gordon, you were so stressed about work. I needed to look good for you." I did not let them bicker. I turned to Bree. "Bree," I said, Bree flinched. She reached out and tapped her phone screen, pausing the recording. She sensed that what was coming would not fit her brand. Year 2020 to present. I said, you believe you are a self-made influencer. You believe your lifestyle is funded by your hustle. I held up a dense packet of papers. Your apartment deposit, $3,000, paid by me. Your car insurance for the last 4 years, $8,000, paid by me. The professional camera gear you use, purchased on my credit card under the guise of school supplies when you enrolled in that photography course you dropped out of after 2 weeks, $5,000. Bree's mouth opened, but no sound came out. But here's the kicker, I said, flipping to the final page. The brand launch party you threw last year, the one where you told everyone you secured a grant from a local arts council? Bree looked down at her shoes. There was no grant. I said, Gordon told me he needed $12,000 to pay off a loan shark who was threatening his knees. He took the money and gave it to you for catering and a DJ. Bree's head snapped up. She looked at her father with wide, horrified eyes. You told me you sold your vintage watch. You said you believed in my dream. Gordon was sweating profusely now. He looked trapped. He looked from Marla, whose spa secrets were out, to Bree, whose career was built on lies, to me, the executioner holding the ledger. He tried the only move he had left. He tried to be the patriarch. I did what I had to do, Gordon shouted, slamming his hand on the armrest. I moved money around to keep this family happy. I am the father. It is my job to provide, even if I have to rob Peter to pay Paul. I am Peter, I yelled back. I am always Peter. You have been robbing me for a decade to buy their love. I threw the stack of papers onto the coffee table. They slid across the polished wood, fanning out like a winning hand of cards. Total misappropriated funds, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm, including the unauthorized credit card usage and the unpaid personal loans. $142,000. I looked at Aunt Linda. She was staring at Gordon with a mixture of pity and disgust. You want the house? I asked Gordon. You want to talk about who deserves the 5 bedrooms? I pointed to the papers. That house is the equity I built while you were draining my accounts. That house is the only thing I have left after supporting 3 adults for 10 years. Gordon slumped in his chair. The fight had left him. He looked small. He looked old. The bravado of the successful businessman was gone, replaced by the reality of a grifter who had been caught. Marla was weeping softly, not for the family, but for her own humiliation. Bree was staring at the wall, her identity crisis playing out in real time. She realized that she wasn't a creative genius. She was a trust fund kid, and the trust fund was her sister's paycheck. I picked up my tablet. I am done, I said. I am done paying for the spa days. I am done paying for the parties. I am done paying for the lies. I looked at Bree. Turn off the camera. Bree. It is off, she whispered. Good, I said, because the show is over. I turned to walk away. The room felt different now. The air was no longer heavy with judgment. It was heavy with the truth. I wasn't the crazy daughter. I wasn't the selfish sister. I was the bank. And I had just foreclosed on their delusions. Wait, Gordon croaked. I stopped at the door. I did not turn around. What are you going to do? He asked. I will send you a bill, I said. I walked out of the house and into the sunlight. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the weight of them on my shoulders. I had laid the burden down on Aunt Linda's coffee table, right where it belonged. The Sunday afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, melancholic shadows across Aunt Linda's living room, but I was not finished. The financial autopsy was complete, yet there was one final, malignant tumor that needed to be excised. I had exposed the past, but now I had to dismantle the future they had tried to mortgage without my consent. The room was still reeling from the revelation of the $142,000. Gordon was slumped in his chair, a man defeated by his own bank statements. Marla was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, mourning the loss of her public image. Bree was silent. staring at the floor, stripped of her victimhood. But I knew something they did not. During my investigation the previous night, after I had locked down my credit and traced the fraudulent loan application, I had found something else. In the digital trail of my father's emails, which were auto-saved on an old tablet he had given me years ago and never wiped, I had found a PDF. It was a document titled simply, "The Agency Agreement." I reached into the back of the manila envelope. This was the document I had saved for last. It was not a bank statement. It was a legal contract. "There is one more thing," I said, breaking the heavy silence. Gordon looked up. His eyes were dull, but a flicker of genuine fear passed through them. He knew he had signed things he should not have signed. He just did not know which one I had found. I walked over to Bree. She looked up at me, her mascara smeared, her expression a mix of resentment and exhaustion. "You kept talking about your big break." "Bree," I said softly, "you kept talking about the sponsors, the brand deal, the launch." "I am not talking about it anymore," Bree muttered. "You ruined it." "No," I said, "I did not ruin it. It was never real to begin with." I placed the document on the table in front of her. It was 20 pages thick, bound with a plastic clip. "This is the contract you signed with the digital talent agency in Los Angeles," I said. Bree's eyes widened. "How did you get this?" "It does not matter," I said. "What matters is what it says." I flipped the document open to page 12. I had highlighted a specific paragraph in neon yellow. "Read Clause 7. Section B," I said. Bree hesitated, then leaned forward. She read it silently, her lips moving. Then she stopped, her face drained of color. "Read it out loud." "Bree," I commanded. Bree swallowed hard. Her voice was shaking. "The talent, meaning me, guarantees that she has exclusive 24-hour access to a production facility meeting the specifications outlined in Exhibit A. Said facility must include a minimum of 2,000 square feet of interior shooting space, professional-grade natural lighting, and soundproofing. Failure to provide said facility within 30 days of signing constitutes a material breach of contract." I nodded. "And what is the address listed in Exhibit A?" Bree looked at the appendix. 1402 Oakwood Drive, she whispered. "My address." "And who signed as the guarantor of this facility?" I asked. Bree looked at the bottom of the page. "Gordon Rowe," she said. I turned to my father. He was staring at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. "You signed a commercial contract guaranteeing access to a property you do not own," I said. "You committed fraud against a corporation. Dad, this is not just about lying to your daughter. You legally bound Bree to deliver a house that belongs to me." I looked back at Bree. "Do you know what the penalty is for breach of contract in a deal this size?" I asked. Bree shook her head, tears welling up again. "I did the math," I said. "I looked up the standard damages for the agency listed. If you default, you owe them the projected revenue of the first year. Based on the numbers in this contract, that is $75,000. Bree gasped. She put her hand over her mouth. $75,000, I repeated. "And since Gordon signed as the guarantor, he is liable too. But since he has no money, because he spent it all on sushi and spa treatments, guess who they will come after?" I let the question hang in the air. "They will sue you." "Bree," I said, "they will garnish your future wages. They will ruin your credit score before you even have a chance to build one." Bree turned to Gordon. Her voice rose to a shriek. "Dad, you told me it was handled. You told me you owned the house. You signed the paper." Gordon waved his hand feebly. "I was going to get the title transferred. It was a formality. Mary was going to agree." "She never agreed," Bree screamed. "She never said yes. You made me sign a contract based on a lie." Bree stood up, knocking the ottoman over. She was pacing now, a trapped animal. The reality of her situation was finally piercing the bubble of entitlement she had lived in. She wasn't just homeless. She was on the verge of bankruptcy. I waited for her panic to peak. Then I offered the lifeline. "There is a way out," I said. Bree stopped pacing. She looked at me, desperate. "What?" she asked. "What do I do?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I had typed it up that morning. "This is an affidavit," I explained. "It states that you were misled regarding the ownership of the property. It states that Gordon Rowe falsely represented his assets to you and to the agency. It states that you signed the contract under duress and misinformation provided by your father." I placed a pen on top of the paper. "If you sign this, and we send it to the agency immediately, they will likely void the contract. They do not want to be involved in a family fraud case. They will cut ties with you. Yes, you will lose the sponsorship, but you will not be sued for $75,000. You will walk away with nothing, which is better than walking away with a debt you can never pay." Bree looked at the paper, then she looked at her father. Gordon sat up straighter. "Bree, do not sign that. Do not throw your father under the bus. We can fight this. We can find a loophole." "There is no loophole." "Dad!" Bree shouted. "You lied. You lied about everything. You put me in a trap." "Bree, listen to me," Gordon pleaded. "If you sign that, you are admitting I committed fraud. They could come after me legally." "They are already going to come after you," Bree yelled. "But if I sign this, at least I'm safe." She looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. "If I sign this, will you help me with the legal stuff?" she asked. "I will send the email." I said, "I will attach the deed proving I am the sole owner. I will handle the agency." Bree did not hesitate. She picked up the pen. "Bree," Gordon shouted, "do not do it." Bree scribbled her signature on the line. She pressed down so hard the pen almost tore the paper. She finished, then threw the pen at Gordon. It hit him in the chest and bounced off. "There," Bree said, her voice shaking with rage. "I signed it. Are you happy? Dad? You wanted a signature. You got one." She turned to me. "Take it," she said. "Send it. I do not want the deal. I do not want the studio. I just want out." I took the affidavit. I checked the signature. It was valid. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the document, and attached it to the draft email I had prepared for the agency's legal department. I hit send. "It is done," I said. The notification sound of the email being sent was the only sound in the room. Gordon looked at Bree with a mixture of shock and betrayal. He could not believe that his golden child, the one he had pampered and protected, had just sacrificed him to save herself. He did not understand that he had taught her well. He had taught her that self-preservation was the only law that mattered. "You chose her side," Gordon whispered. "I chose the truth," Bree snapped. "You built my career on a house that wasn't yours. You made me look like a fool." She grabbed her purse. "I am leaving," Bree announced. "Where are you going?" Marla asked, her voice trembling. "I am going to stay with a friend," Bree said. "And do not follow me. I need to figure out how to fix my life without you people ruining it." She walked out the front door without looking back. I watched her go. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was fleeting. Bree was 22. It was time she learned that the world does not run on wishes and daddy's lies. It runs on contracts and ownership. I looked at Gordon. He was alone now. His army had deserted him. His leverage was gone. His reputation was shredded. "The agency will likely blacklist you," I said calmly, "and once they process that affidavit, they might decide to pursue legal action against you for the attempted fraud. I would suggest you find a lawyer, but I know you cannot afford one." Gordon looked up at me. His eyes were empty. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Why did you go this far?" "Because you gave me no choice," I said. "You tried to take the one thing that was mine. You thought I would roll over because I am your daughter. But you forgot that I am also the woman who paid your bills for 10 years. I know exactly how weak you are." I picked up my envelope. I had the affidavit. I had the bank statements. I had the rejected loan application. I walked over to Aunt Linda. "I am sorry for the drama. Linda," I said, "but the truth is rarely quiet." Linda nodded slowly. She looked at her brother with new eyes. She saw him not as the unfortunate victim of bad luck, but as the architect of his own disaster. I walked out to my car. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. Bree's career was dead. Gordon's credibility was incinerated. My house was safe. But there was one final step. The legal system needed to formalize what we had just established in this living room. Gordon would try to wiggle out. He always did. I needed to make sure the door was not just closed, but welded shut. The legal notice arrived via a process server on a Tuesday morning. 3 days after the showdown at Aunt Linda's house, it was taped to my front door. A heavy packet of papers inside a plastic sleeve, flapping in the wind like a white flag of war. But it was not a surrender. It was a declaration of siege. I brought the packet inside and laid it on the kitchen island. I did not panic. I poured a cup of coffee and read through the legalese with the same clinical detachment I used when reading patient charts. Gordon Rowe was suing me. The filing was for a constructive trust. In the twisted logic of his attorney, a strip mall lawyer named Mr. Blanton, who likely accepted payment in promises and future favors, Gordon was claiming that although the deed was in my name, the house was effectively his. He argued that his consulting advice on the purchase, his management of the property, and the money I had given him over the years were not loans or gifts, but investments toward his equity share. He claimed we had a verbal agreement that the house was a family asset. He was asking for 50% of the property value or the right of immediate occupancy. It was a desperate Hail Mary pass. He was banking on the fact that family court is often messy, that judges hate evicting elderly fathers, and that I would be too terrified of a public legal battle to fight back. He thought I would settle. He thought I would write him a check for $50,000 just to make him go away. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He was dealing with the person who had kept the receipts. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance was not a strip mall lawyer. He was a shark in a bespoke suit who specialized in property law and fraud. I had retained him on Monday morning, paying a retainer that cost me 3 months of savings. It was expensive, but it was cheaper than losing my house. He filed. I told Vance when he answered. "Good," Vance said, his voice smooth and cold. "That means we get to move to discovery. Bring the file. Mary, it is time to drop the hammer." The preliminary meeting took place 72 hours later in the conference room of Vance's firm. The room was glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne. Gordon arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by Mr. Blanton. My father wore his best suit, but it looked tired. The cuffs were frayed, and there was a stain on the lapel he had tried to scrub out. He did not look at me. He looked at the view, trying to project an air of nonchalance, but his hands were trembling. Bree was there too. She sat at the far end of the table, looking like a ghost. She had not been named in the suit, but Gordon had dragged her along, likely as a prop to garner sympathy, a witness to the cruelty of her sister. Mr. Blanton cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thin stack of papers. "My client asserts that he is the rightful co-owner of the property at 1402 Oakwood Drive," Blanton began, his voice pompous. "We have witness testimony stating that Ms. Rowe verbally promised him life tenancy. Furthermore, Mr. Rowe has contributed significant sweat equity to the maintenance of the home. We are prepared to accept a settlement of $200,000 to relinquish his claim." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table. I looked at Gordon. He was staring at the water pitcher, refusing to meet my gaze. Mr. Vance did not laugh, though the offer was laughable. He simply adjusted his glasses. "Is that all?" Vance asked. "That is our opening position," Blanton said. "If you refuse, we will proceed to trial. We will paint a picture of an ungrateful daughter exploiting her elderly father's vulnerability." Vance nodded. He reached for the thick binder I had prepared. It was 4 inches thick, organized with color-coded tabs. He slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Mr. Blanton. "Before you proceed to trial," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, "you might want to review the counter-evidence." Blanton looked at the binder. "What is this?" "This is the history of your client's financial relationship with my client," Vance said. Blanton opened the binder. The first page was the rejected loan application. "Tab A," Vance said, A home equity line of credit application submitted last Wednesday. It lists Gordon Rowe as a co-borrower. It includes a signature purporting to be Mary Rose. Blanton frowned. He looked at Gordon. You told me you never applied for the loan. You said that was a misunderstanding. Gordon shifted in his seat. It was a draft. I was just seeing what the rates were. Vance pointed to the page. It was submitted to underwriting. Mr. Rowe, that constitutes wire fraud and bank fraud. My client has the rejection letter stating the Social Security number did not match the applicant's identity. Blanton's face went slightly pale. He turned the page. Tab B, Vance continued. The affidavit signed by Bree Rowe 3 days ago. Bree flinched. Gordon shot her a venomous look. In this sworn statement, Vance said, looking directly at Bree, Ms. Bree Rowe admits that she was coerced by her father into signing a commercial lease agreement based on the false representation that he owned the property. She attests that he knew he had no legal title. Vance looked at Blanton. If you argue in court that there was a verbal agreement for ownership, I will put the daughter on the stand. She will testify that her father knowingly lied to a third-party agency about the deed. That destroys his credibility as a witness. It also opens him up to perjury charges. Blanton was reading rapidly now. He was sweating. He realized he had walked into a minefield. Tab C, Vance said. Relentless. The ledger. $142,000 in misappropriated funds, unauthorized credit card charges, and unpaid personal loans. Vance leaned forward. You are suing for unjust enrichment, Mr. Blanton? My client has effectively been the sole financier of Mr. Rowe's lifestyle for a decade. If this goes to court, we will not just defend, we will counterclaim. We will sue for the return of every single dollar. We will garnish his Social Security. We will place a lien on any future assets he might acquire. We will bankrupt him. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Gordon finally spoke. His voice was small, stripped of its usual boom. You would do that to your own father? He asked. Over a house? I leaned forward. This was the first time I had spoken since the meeting began. It is not just a house. Gordon, I said, it is my life. You tried to steal my credit. You tried to steal my future. You tried to steal my peace. I looked him in the eye. And yes, I would do it, because you taught me that business is business. Bree let out a sob. Mary, please, he is broke. He has nowhere to go. If you sue him, he will be on the street. Then he should have thought about that before he forged my signature, I said coldly. Bree looked at me, her eyes red. You have changed. Mary, you used to be so nice. I was never nice. Bree, I said, I was convenient. There is a difference. Mr. Blanton closed the binder. He looked at his client with a mixture of anger and resignation. He knew the case was dead. The constructive trust argument relied on the idea that Gordon was a victim. The evidence showed he was a predator. No judge would grant him equity. They would grant him a sentence. Mr. Rowe, Blanton said, his voice tight. We need to step into the hallway. I am not going anywhere, Gordon snapped. He was cornered, and he was lashing out. She is bluffing. She won't send me to jail. Mr. Vance picked up a single sheet of paper from his own briefcase. We have already drafted the criminal complaint with the district attorney's office regarding the identity theft, Vance said calmly. We have not filed it yet. We were waiting to see the outcome of this meeting. Gordon froze. He looked at the paper in Vance's hand. It was the nuclear option. If you drop this lawsuit with prejudice, Vance said, and if you sign a settlement agreement stating you have no claim to the property and will never contact my client again regarding financial matters, we might be persuaded to shred this complaint. Gordon looked at me. He was searching for the little girl who used to bring him his slippers. He was searching for the woman who paid his credit card bills without asking questions. He found only a stranger made of ice and logic. Do it, Dad, Bree whispered. She has you. Gordon slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The delusion that he was the head of the family, the successful businessman, the decision-maker. finally evaporated. He was just an old man who had tried to con the wrong person. "Fine," Gordon whispered. "Mr. Blanton let out a breath he had been holding. "We will agree to a dismissal," Blanton said. "Not just a dismissal," Vance corrected. "A formal mediation. We want everything in writing. We want a binding agreement that explicitly waives all future claims. We want it watertight. We will schedule it for next week." Blanton nodded. "Send over the dates." Gordon stood up. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only the bitter resentment of a ruler whose subject has revolted. "You get to keep your house." "Mary," Gordon said, "I hope it is warm enough for you." "It will be," I said, "because it is mine." He walked out of the room, Blanton trailing behind him with the binder of evidence that had destroyed him. Bree lingered for a second. She looked like she wanted to say something, to bridge the gap, to ask if she could maybe crash on my couch since the deal was off. I looked at her and raised a single eyebrow. "Goodbye, Bree," I said. She lowered her head and followed our father out the door. The heavy glass door clicked shut. The silence returned to the room. Mr. Vance smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. "That went well?" he said. I looked at the empty chairs where my family had sat. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The cord had been cut. The parasite had been removed. "It is not over yet," I said. "We still have to sign the papers." Vance nodded. "The mediation will be the funeral for their claims. We will bury this next week." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, Gordon was likely screaming at Blanton, blaming everyone but himself. Somewhere down there, Bree was realizing she had to find a job. And somewhere out in the suburbs, my 5-bedroom house was waiting for me. Empty, quiet, safe. I checked my watch. I had a shift at the clinic in 2 hours. I had patients to heal. I picked up my purse. "Let's draft the agreement." I told Vance, "I want to make sure they can never come back." I walked out of the office, ready for the final act. The mediation room was painted a neutral, inoffensive shade of beige, designed to calm nerves and encourage compromise. It failed. The air inside was thick with a tension so brittle it felt like it might snap if anyone breathed too loudly. On one side of the long oval table sat Gordon and his lawyer, Mr. Blanton. On the other side sat Mr. Vance and me. At the head of the table sat the mediator, a retired judge named Mrs. Gable, who looked like she had seen every variety of human greed and was impressed by none of it. This was the end of the line. There were no more dinners, no more text messages, no more rain-soaked porches. There was only this room and the stack of documents that would define the rest of our lives. Mrs. Gable adjusted her glasses and looked at Gordon. "Mr. Rowe," she began, her voice dry and authoritative. "We are here to resolve the dispute regarding the property at 1402 Oakwood Drive. Your counsel has filed a motion claiming a constructive trust based on verbal promises and sweat equity. However, I have reviewed the preliminary evidence submitted by the respondent." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I need you to answer a question for me, Mr. Rowe, and I need you to answer it with a simple yes or no. Is your name on the deed to this property?" Gordon shifted in his chair. He looked at Mr. Blanton, who was busy studying a blank notepad. Gordon looked back at the mediator. "It is complicated." "Your Honor," Gordon said. "It is not." "Mrs. Gable interrupted. "I am not your Honor. I am a mediator. And the question is not complicated. Is your name on the title?" "No," Gordon whispered. Mrs. Gable nodded. She made a note on her file. "Is there any written contract, signed by Ms. Mary Rowe, granting you ownership interest, tenancy rights, or equity in this property?" Gordon cleared his throat. We had an understanding. A father-daughter bond is not something you write down on a napkin. It is implied. I raised her. I guided her financial decisions. That house exists because of my guidance. Mr. Vance leaned forward. "With respect," Vance said, his voice smooth as polished glass. "The only financial guidance Mr. Rowe provided was instructing my client on how to pay off his personal debts. We have provided the forensic accounting in Exhibit C. Vance tapped the thick binder lying on the table. $142,000, Vance stated. That is the sum of the bond Mr. Rowe is referring to. If there is an implied contract here, it is that my client is the creditor and Mr. Rowe is the debtor. Gordon's face flushed a deep, angry red. That is a distortion, he sputtered. I was building a legacy. Legacy? I spoke up for the first time. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked at my father. Is the legacy the loan application you forged? I asked. Is the legacy the contract you tricked Bree into signing? Mr. Blanton placed a hand on Gordon's arm to silence him. Ms. Rowe, Blanton said, addressing me. My client is willing to drop the constructive trust claim. However, he is requesting a compassionate settlement. He is an elderly man with limited resources. He is asking for a 6-month grace period to reside in the property while he stabilizes his situation. Surely, as his daughter, you can agree to that. The room looked at me. It was the classic trap, the appeal to emotion, the idea that no matter how toxic the parent, the child owes them a roof. I thought about the night in the rain. I thought about the suitcases. I thought about the sneer on his face when he told me I was dead to him. No, I said. Gordon's head snapped up. No? Blanton asked. No grace period, I said. No settlement, no access. I opened my own folder. We are not here to negotiate my charity, I continued. We are here to formalize the separation. I want a permanent restraining order regarding my finances. I want a signed admission that he has no claim to the property, and I want him to indemnify me against any lawsuits arising from the contract with the talent agency. Bree, who had been sitting quietly in the corner chair, made a small sound. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She was not recording. There was no ring light. There was just a young woman realizing that her safety net had been woven out of cobwebs. The agency already canceled the deal. Mary, Bree said, her voice hollow. I got the email this morning. They are threatening to sue Dad for misrepresentation. I looked at Gordon. Then you have bigger problems than where you are going to sleep, I said. Gordon slammed his hand on the table. You are enjoying this, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are enjoying seeing me beg. You told me not to worry, remember? That night at dinner. You smiled and said, Dad, don't worry. I have handled it. You lied to me. I did not lie, I said calmly. I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. I told you I handled it, I said, and I did. I handled the fraud. I handled the theft. I handled the manipulation. I stopped you from destroying my life. That is what handling it looks like. Gordon stared at me. He looked for the crack in the armor. He looked for the guilt, but there was none. I had burned the guilt in the fireplace of my 5-bedroom house. Mrs. Gable cleared her throat. Mr. Rowe, given the evidence of the fraudulent loan application which Mr. Vance has indicated they are willing to forward to the district attorney if this matter is not resolved today, I strongly suggest you sign the release. Gordon looked at the document Vance slid across the table. It was a complete surrender. It acknowledged that he had no interest in the house. It barred him from ever asking me for money again. If he signed it, he walked away with nothing but his freedom. If he didn't, he went to court, and then likely to jail. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. I hope you are happy, Mary, he hissed. You kept the house, but you lost your family. I looked at Bree, who was refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Gordon, a man who loved my money more than he loved me. I did not lose a family. I said, I lost a liability. Gordon signed the paper. The scratching of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a chain breaking. He threw the pen down and stood up. He did not look at me again. He walked out of the room, a diminished figure in a frayed suit. Bree followed him, trailing behind like a shadow that had lost its object. Mr. Blanton gathered his papers, gave a curt nod, and left. I was alone with Vance and the mediator. Mrs. Gable picked up the signed document and stamped it. "It is finished," she said. "The title is clear. The dispute is closed." "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the mediation center and into the parking lot. The sun was shining. It was a bright, ordinary Tuesday. People were walking their dogs. Cars were driving by. The world had not stopped because the Rowe family had imploded. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. For years, I had filled that seat with their needs, their dramas, their debts. I had driven through life with the emergency brake on, dragging them behind me. Now the brake was released. I started the engine. I put the car in drive. I was going home, to my house, my 5 bedrooms, my kitchen where I would cook dinner for one, or for friends who actually respected me. I thought about the hook I had used to catch their attention that night at dinner. "Dad, don't worry." He shouldn't worry. I had taught him a valuable lesson. I had taught him that you cannot build a castle on someone else's back and expect them to stand still forever. I turned onto the main road. Merging into traffic, I was Mary Rowe. I was 34 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was entirely, wonderfully free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how I handled my family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.